Ramon Sanchez is more than familiar with the MacArthur Causeway. Thousands of Cubans leaving their homeland finally end up here, some rescued by his organization, Democracy for Cuba. Since a massive exodus of Cubans in 1994, the U.S. has implemented a tougher policy towards Cubans, the so-called wet foot, dry foot policy. To be able to stay in the U.S., Cubans must set foot on dry land and not just reach territorial waters. But Ramon remembers 5 years ago, thousands of Cuban Americans came to the bridge to help migrants being sent away.
After we did the taking of the bridge, of the MacArthur Causeway Bridge, peacefully for about 4.5 hours, the government began negotiating with us. And eventually that same day, they returned the people that were already headed to Cuba back to land and made it to freedom. Unfortunately, that cannot be the case in every instance.
Ramon has also helped Mercedes Hernandez and her niece Elisa. In 2006, Elisa washed up to this 7-mile bridge that links far-flung Key West to mainland Miami, but she was sent back to Cuba, the Coast Guards claiming the bridge was damaged and not in use, and her boat then not officially reaching dry land. Elisa waited a year before a court ruled she could go back to the U.S.
When the Coast Guard arrived, he told us that we were going to be free, that we were going to have some beers. I remember those words very clearly. So we decided to join them because we believed that they were going to leave us on dry land. We boarded, they took us to the marina, they had us wait, but then they took the boat back out, took us back into the ocean, made us board another boat and took us back to Cuba. It took 7 days.
Like most Cuban Americans, Elisa thinks the law should be modified.
They promised to take us to dry land. In the end, they didn't fulfill their promise.
Cheryl Little is the executive director of the Florida Immigration Advocacy Center. She also criticizes the wet foot, dry foot policy.
We've seen cases where Cubans have been very close to dry land and struggling to swim ashore, and the Coast Guard, which usually does a fabulous job of rescuing people, is put in the untenable position of trying to prevent those Cubans from making it to dry land, using tactics that frankly have been questioned and rightly so by a number of advocates.
The number of migrants has been rising since Fidel Castro left power earlier this year. According to Cubans from Miami, another reason why the U.S. government should ease the wet foot, dry foot policy.